Visit gbnews.com, keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. We will be belatedly celebrating World Polar Bear Day as population numbers continue to grow, despite what the apocalyptic climate doomsters say. But the unelected and unaccountable Climate Change Committee now wants to meddle with the UK's carbon budget. Meanwhile, it seems the French President Emmanuel Macron is trying to plunge the West into World War III with Russia, as Britain rejects his plans to send NATO troops into Ukraine. But the armed forces can hardly define what a woman is, let alone go to war with Russia. The Duke of Sussex has suffered a fall from his high horse. This is as the High Court has ruled in favour of the Home Office after the Duke took the case of his UK police protection to court. Plus, the brutal practice of debanking is alive and well, as new data have revealed more than 140,000 small and medium-sized businesses were debanked by the UK's largest banks last year. Surely it's time to toughen the laws to protect us. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most particularly pugnacious panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day, with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, within the last hour, the Metropolitan Police has confirmed to us that a complaint has been made against the former Tory MP Lee Anderson over comments he made about the London Mayor. An unknown complainant went to the Met Police a day after Lee Anderson said Islamists had control of Sadiq Khan. The ex-deputy Tory party chairman was stripped of the whip after refusing to apologise for his remarks. He's since admitted his choice of words was clumsy, but said he'd been trying to represent the concerns of his constituents. A major search and rescue was launched after the bodies of at least 3 suspected migrants were pulled from the English Channel today. Despite the bad weather, GB News filmed these pictures of an RNLI lifeboat rushing to rescue the small boat, which had migrants on board and was getting into difficulties in poor visibility and choppy waters. It's believed people smuggling gangs pushed a number of boats into the water throughout the day. 300 people were taken to border force processing centres in Dover. Farmers in Wales were warning today that their industry is at risk if the Welsh Government goes ahead with proposed changes to farming subsidies. Outside the Welsh Parliament, they protested against plans which require 20% of their agricultural land to be set aside for environmental initiatives. The Welsh Labour Government insists the changes are necessary to fight climate change, but also conceded the plan could still be adjusted at the end of a consultation. Unions are warning there'll be thousands of job losses, and the leader of the Welsh Conservatives told GB News it'll be disastrous for Wales.
Well, let's not forget, people need food to survive and live on their everyday existence. So we're not talking about an industry here that isn't required to feed the nation. And if we don't have farmers, we don't have food. And by the government's own figures, if this scheme goes ahead unchanged, 5,500 farmers will lose their livelihoods, 125,000 cattle will be lost in Wales, 800,000 sheep, and £200 million worth of economic activity will be lost. So it'll be a devastating impact on rural communities the length and breadth of Wales.
Andrew Davis, let me just bring you a little bit of breaking news we're receiving from Westminster Police. Officers have responded to a small pro-Palestinian protest in Whitehall where protesters apparently threw paint at a property. We're told all 15 of those protesters have been arrested for conspiracy to cause criminal damage and are in custody. That's all we have at the moment. We'll try and find out more for you and, of course, bring it to you in our next hour of news. Now, MPs facing threats to their safety will get extra security as part of a new £31 million government package. Concerns are growing about MPs being targeted by protesters since the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. The Home Office says the money will be used to increase private sector security provision, and all elected representatives will have a dedicated named police contact to liaise with. And finally, the future site of the UK's biggest electric vehicle battery manufacturer has been confirmed in Somerset. Indian-owned Tata says it'll invest £4 billion in a brownfield site in the Bridgewater area of the county. The new plant is expected to create around 4,000 jobs and thousands more in the supply chain. Tata says battery production is set to begin there in 2026. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, it's reassuring that everybody's talking about Somerset. It really is God's own county. But yesterday was World Polar Bear Day. We don't have polar bears in Somerset, but it was World Polar Bear Day. And the Global Policy Foundation has published its annual report on polar bear population statistics. And as it happens, 2023 was an excellent year for polar bears. Since the 1960s, in spite of the constant apocalyptic doomsdares and their predictions, the polar bear population has nearly tripled to over 32,000. But polar bears are a metaphor for the climate change agenda. For decades, we've been warned about the apocalypse, and on many occasions, the climate change's lobby have been wrong about its assertions. Nearly 10 years ago, The Guardian wrote an obituary for the Great Barrier Reef. Yet it was in 2022 that scientists revealed 2/3 of the reef has the highest coral coverage since records began. What about last summer, when the wildfire hysteria reached its apex? Remember the fear-mongering front page from the Evening Standard? But none of the broadcasters or news institutions, except GB News, bothered to mention that according to both the Royal Society and to NASA, total global areas burnt by wildfires is at a 25-year low. Now, that's not to say that climate change isn't occurring and we can do things to help in that respect, but the hysteria has serious consequences for policy. The Climate Change Committee is an increasingly powerful and influential, unaccountable institution that holds sway over government policy. The Climate Change Act, which established the committee, requires the government to commit to legally binding carbon budgets as a stepping stone to achieving net zero by 2050. And we're currently on our fourth carbon budget for the years 2023 to 2027, and we've overachieved by about 391 million tonnes of carbon dioxide, 15% or so of the total budget. The Climate Change Committee is warning against carrying over these surplus emissions, claiming that future carbon budgets will require an increase in the pace and breadth of decarbonisation, according to the letter written to the Climate Minister, Graham Stewart. The letter also cites pledges made at the Dubai COP28 summit. But what is the point of setting carbon budgets if when we overachieve in certain areas, we can't carry over the surplus? That's how budgeting works. But it's beyond that, because the real budget is how much does this cost in pounds, shillings and pence. And we see the news from Wales that Welsh farmers are worried that they're going to be put out of business because these costs are rising. The steel industry, I was in Scunthorpe a few weeks ago, is already being put out of business because of these very high energy prices. Our energy prices, our electricity prices are more than double those in the United States, and this is damaging our economy, lowering the standard of living and making us all poorer. The United States and China are not following our lead. The idea that other nations will look at what Blighty's doing and think, well, they must do it too, has always been for the birds, hopelessly optimistic and an unreasonable expectation of the way we are viewed in the world nowadays. So we're stuck with low growth because of an unaccountable committee and flawed policy. So, of course, we should carry forward the unused carbon dioxide from the previous budget. But the time has come to focus on growth and standard of livings, not on a romantic but impoverishing idyll. As ever, let me know your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm delighted to be joined now by Tom Burke, co-founder and chairman of E3G, the climate change think tank. Tom, thank you very much for coming in.
Happy to be here.
We've overachieved. This budget is spare. It means we can slow the pace and wait until the technology is ready. or it's affordable?
Actually, it doesn't, but I'll come to that in a minute, because I think it's rather extraordinary for you, as a Member of Parliament, to describe a climate change committee created by Parliament as unaccountable. Exactly what you're there for, is to account for it. If you created it unaccountably,
well, we can
that's
abolish
because
it.
Yes, of course
Parliament
you can.
Can abolish it.
Of course you can.
That is true.
Yeah, absolutely right.
But currently
if you think it's doing the wrong things...
But currently it is unaccountable.
No, it's not unaccountable.
Yes,
it's like saying every public body is unaccountable.
No, that's not true.
Well, who should it be accountable
to?
to?
That's not true, because normal public bodies are accountable to ministers. The Climate Change Committee is not accountable to ministers.
Specifically said, in order to do something which I would have thought you would be very much in favour of, that it should be accountable to Parliament, not accountable to government, because governments don't always do what parliamentarians want them to do.
No, because our system of government is the executive runs day-to-day business on laws passed by Parliament, that ministers are accountable to Parliament, not other bodies, not third-party bodies. Ministers represent the decisions of government to a democratically accountable Parliament, and they then have the ability to change those decisions if Parliament doesn't agree. This doesn't apply with the Climate Change Committee. The chairman of the Climate Change Committee doesn't answer questions on the floor of the House.
No, that's true. It doesn't apply. You're absolutely right about it. It doesn't apply to the Climate Change Committee because Parliament decided it shouldn't do. And what's more, a government of which you are a supporter made that decision.
No, it didn't. No, the Climate Change Committee was established under the Climate Change Act under the Blair-Brown years. It predates this administration.
Even so, as a government with a clear majority, if you thought it was unaccountable and shouldn't be, you had a perfectly good opportunity. You had a perfectly good opportunity to change the legislation.
But
you could have made it accountable in any other way.
Parliamentary accountability is the day-to-day accountability that a minister can be called to the dispatch box on any day Parliament is sitting to defend policy. This Climate Change Committee fellow sends out a letter saying what policy should be. We can't call him to the floor of the House of Commons to answer. He is only accountable if you take the nuclear option of abolishing his whole committee.
Sorry, you have many more options than that. You can make the Climate Change Committee accountable to a minister if that's what you wish to do.
But then you're having ministerial accountabilities. Until you do that, it's not accountable, which was the point I was making.
But then you're making a rather trivial point.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about our standards of our Constitution, which is that ministers are accountable to policy, to Parliament for policy, not third-party bodies who are unaccountable. That's the whole point of them.
But there are an enormous number of public bodies that are not directly accountable. They are only accountable through ministers. If you think this body should be, you have two questions to answer. Why, in the first place, did Parliament, of which you were a member, agree for it not to be accountable in that traditional way?
I wasn't a member when it came in.
Well, forgive me, I haven't been following your career that closely.
No, but if you say these things, you ought to get them right.
Well, that's absolutely true, as should you. And the key point is you've always been able to make an amendment, to move, to try and change that, to have private members' bill, lots of tools.
Private members' bills never get through like that. As you know perfectly well. Because the
as you know perfectly well, the reality is if the Climate Change Committee was acting in a way that was contrary to our Constitution, you have a whole range of things you can do about that.
Our constitutional system works on the basis of ministerial accountability to Parliament. That when you set up third-party bodies that are not directly accountable, then their decision-making can go on unchallenged. This is a bad precedent, and it's done with other bodies, you're quite right. And this has been one of the great mistakes of public policy in recent years. You've got Natural England and other bodies, the Environment Agency, that are similarly unaccountable, and it leads to decisions being made that my constituents can't get changed. If they come to me and seek redress of grievance over a decision made by a minister, then you can use parliamentary mechanisms to hold that to account. When it's made by an unaccountable body, you can't. This reduces our democratic rights. This is bad government.
I'm always in favour of increasing our democratic rights. Absolutely right. I go for proportional representation right away. I know you won't support that. But if you feel so strongly...
Makes us less well represented.
If you feel so strongly about that, and you have members in your government, which has now, since 2010, been in charge, why have you not done anything to change it? If you think this is a really important constitutional issue, why are we having this debate now? Because it's the first time I've had this debate with anybody.
Because these bodies made sense when we were still a member of the European Union. It's part of the change of Brexit. Why did they make sense then? Because the rules they were following weren't accountable to Parliament but were from the European Union. And what we've done is we have disconnected from the European Union and left these bodies with no accountability. And this is a terrible political mistake because this Climate Change Committee risks ruining our economy, and we've seen the electricity figures, the decline in electricity usage that we have had, and the lack of economic growth and lack of productivity growth that we've had, and we've got a climate change committee that is compounding that. And what we want is ministers who are sensitive to public opinion, sensitive to the electorate, changing these decisions. And this is something that needs to be done.
I think it's quite an extraordinary thing for you to blame our absence of growth on the Climate Change Committee. I wish it were that powerful, but it really isn't.
I blame it on our high energy prices, which come in part from the Climate Change Act and from the Climate Change Committee. Yes.
Well, actually, they come more, especially the bills for people, ordinary people who live every day in our economy. They come from the fact that this government stopped helping people to insulate their homes, and so bills have gone up.
That's a tiny proportion of it. It comes from the fact. It comes from the fact that we are, through policy measures, putting extra charges on bills through the extra charges of the network that come to prepare it for getting to net zero.
Well, I'm very interested.
This is adding 20 or 30% to our bills.
In what you think is minor. The cost, because of the energy price guarantee, the cost of not having insulated the houses we would otherwise have insulated is about £12.5 billion. So why do you think that's unimportant?
You're taking an extraordinary period when we underrate people's bills, when prices rise very heavily. Prices come right back down.
Oh, that's true. And if
we'd had fracking, we would never have got into this position, which would have been a marvellous, cheap source of energy. And now what we do is we import fracked gas from the United States at a higher price. It's a crazy policy.
Well, it was crazy policy to try and do it. The idea that we were ever going to frack gas economically in Britain was just an idea of
We're sitting on billions, trillions of cubic feet of gas.
Well, which would be much cheaper. We're also sitting on billions of tons of coal.
We should use that too, but that's our discussion next time. Because coming up next, thank you very much, coming up next, the pint-sized Bonaparte, Monsieur Macron, wants to drag the West into World War III with Russia. But has he learnt nothing from his inspiration? Plus, 140,000 small and medium-sized businesses have been debanked, especially, I think, by Barclays.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Chris, what is the preferred way in which the police go about their business at the moment? There's these two strands of thinking: evidence-based policing versus bobbies on the beat.
It's very, very difficult. The problem that police have got, basically, is that they're too thinly spread, and it's too much is expected of them. There's a long list, isn't it? Every month we hear police need to do more about this, police need to do more about that, and police do their best. They're overwhelmed with bureaucracy. I mean, when I was a young PC, if I took a shoplifter in, then I'd be in and out within an hour. You take a shoplifter in now, and you're doomed for the rest of your shift for 6 or 7 hours dealing with the bureaucracy. Police want to get back in those communities because community policing is really the core of policing. But such are the demands on their time at the moment, and the bureaucracy, and the fact that they are struggling now to retain experienced officers. People are hemorrhaging out of the police, and new recruits coming in haven't got that experience, and there's a good chance they may not stay anyway. So there's all sorts of problems. And for the Home Secretary to glibly say he wants more done, frankly, clearly shows that he's got no understanding of the pressure police are under, and of course the constant criticism that they face across the board. Very rarely do you actually hear of police officers getting praised for acts of bravery or acts of compassion. So there's a problem with morale in the police force, and clearly a problem with the Home Secretary, who needs to get out there and talk to officers on the front line who frankly are struggling. And last night, of course, was a graphic example.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's good to welcome you back. We've been talking about polar bears and the enormous rise in the number of them, along with the Climate Change Committee trying to ruin the economy. Jim says, how refreshing. We in the West are destroying our economies following this cult new religion. Someone must be making a lot of money perpetuating this net zero scam. Philip, why do we even have carbon budgets to begin with? Who approved of this? Well, I'm sorry to say Parliament did. I think it was a mistake. Roger, Jacob, pounds, shillings and pence, really? 20th century currency. It's an expression. One's allowed to use expressions, even old ones, I hope. So what has been happening now is that Emmanuel Macron has suggested that there should be Western boots on the ground in Ukraine, or at any rate they shouldn't be ruled out. The French president lobbed this diplomatic hand grenade on Monday before Stéphane Séjourné, the French foreign minister, laid down covering fire for Mr Macron Tuesday by suggesting that any NATO deployment to Ukraine would be limited to training and advisory missions. The rift among NATO allies has predictably delighted Moscow, and they have warned that a NATO force of any kind in Ukraine would lead to all-out war. Macron's idea may have split NATO, but is not wholly without precedent. Advisors and trainers from both sides were present for many years, many of the Cold War's proxy conflicts. Soviet pilots even flew combat missions against US forces during the Korean War. So what are the risks, and why is President Macron suggesting a red line this time? Well, with me now is Richard Sakwa, a noted expert on the war in Ukraine and Professor of Russian and European Politics at the University of Kent. Richard, thank you very much for joining me. Does Macron have a point? Do we need to do this to help make sure Ukraine wins?
No, in fact, the opposite. I think that his statement is a sign that perhaps the West is beginning to feel that they may not win the war. So it's a sign of desperation rather than a forward-thinking strategic move. What he's done is opened the discussion. He did say, of course, everything should be on the table. He didn't say that it's immediately going to happen, but he's opened what people call the Overton window of what's permissible to talk about.
OK, and so having opened it, have the other NATO members like the UK closed it again? Because the reaction's been quite swift, hasn't it? And the concern about allowing this war to escalate into a war between Russia and the West is a serious one.
Yes, after the comment, a whole stack of countries, Germany, UK, others have said that there's no immediate prospect for direct forces, NATO forces, to be engaged. On the other hand, what Macron was thinking about, I think, was bilateral engagement. So it wasn't going to be a NATO force. And in any case, there are forces there already. There's giving technical support. There's special units. There's intelligence operations. As you saw in the New York Times just the other day, there's 12 CIA bases plus a main command center. So NATO is fully involved even now.
And you're worried that this is a sign of desperation. So what can we do to help Ukraine, or are you genuinely concerned that Russia has the upper hand?
Well, I mean, it's clear Russia does have the upper hand, whether I like it or not. It's moving forwards. The other day, the major bastion town of Avdiivka fell, and Russia's pushing forwards. I think that some people are arguing now that it could even, the line of contact at the moment, which has been more or less in stalemate for the last few months, could collapse fairly soon. So what I think another of the participants in this meeting in Paris where they talked about this was the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico. And he came out of this meeting and said, what he was astonished about was that no one talked about peace or any negotiation process. So this martial spirit isn't going to get anywhere because Russia's got nuclear weapons at the end of the day. So it's always got what Obama said, maybe your favorite person, escalation dominance. So in that context, we should step back and not escalate, but think of a way to get some peace out of this, some sort of honorable peace for all sides.
But Russia's always had that escalation option, but we've got the same, haven't we? So the deterrence ability or the deterrence reality of nuclear weapons works for both sides if Putin were to go down that route. And if he's not a complete madman, then you must assume that it will carry on as a conventional war.
No, it's quite possible, but there's plenty of talk in Russia. Don't forget that Putin is under huge pressure from even hardliners to do something against this endless escalation. As Macron said, first of all, they said they weren't going to supply tanks, then they did. They weren't going to supply the F-16s, and then they did. So in Moscow, the debate is, look, come on, guys, we've got to fight back. And some are arguing perhaps a preemptive nuclear strike, a small one, but just to bring the West to its senses. I mean, it's crazy, all talk, but both sides go escalation, but we could slide into a nuclear confrontation. I think that's the huge danger at this time.
Well, isn't there a risk that even a small nuclear strike would lead to Russia just being wiped out by the US? I mean, the US has overwhelming firepower in nuclear weapons and might use it, that they can't be certain that the US would just accept a nuclear strike.
Well, exactly. Or it could go the other way. Hang on, they're saying this is just so dangerous. We ought to sit down and start negotiating. What are Russia's demands? What are Ukraine's demands? What are the West's demands? But don't forget that it was the West pushing it forwards against endless warnings, which provoked the war in the first place. I'm not justifying it, of course, but I'm saying it will have to explain the context and the history behind it. And only by understanding that can we begin to find some sort of sensible exit strategy. With a bit of luck, Russia will be still in existence at the end of this war, Ukraine hopefully as well, and we also. So we must start now to think of a way out, not by sending more weapons and putting boots on the ground. This is how Vietnam happened. Don't forget, this endless talk of domino theories and so on, which proved in the end totally mistaken.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. With me now is Civitas Senior Fellow Robert Clark, who has just arrived home from Ukraine. Robert, thank you very much for joining me. What were you seeing on the ground when you were in Ukraine?
Thank you very much for having me. Good evening. So I was in Kyiv and a bit further north in the Chernihiv Oblast, and I was lucky enough to meet with several fighters and Ukrainian armed forces who had returned from both Bakhmut and Avdiivka in recent weeks of fighting. And really, there's four things now that the Ukrainian armed forces are almost crying out for. Everyone has heard, obviously, of the ammunition and the artillery shortages, which have been compounded by the indecision, both in Washington and Brussels, to release much-needed military aid to Ukraine. So there is the artillery and the ammunition shortage. There's also a crying need for cyber defense and increased border security against the northern border with Belarus. But also, as well, just more importantly, the continued British presence, for example, training Ukrainian armed forces here in the UK and in Germany under NATO and British frameworks. That's having a real sort of force multiplier, if you like, on the ground. And also, and this comes back to President Macron's incredibly ill thought out and ill conceived of policies regarding French defence. And that's also the need for Ukraine to really demine and sort of get to grips with the problems of the mined territory that it currently has. It's about the combined size of England and Scotland are currently mined in Ukraine. And there's great operations out there like the Halo Trust and other NGOs. But this is where France can play like a leading role, if you like. France has a well-renowned and well-deserved, to be fair, expertise in demining. So there's tangible policies that Macron can achieve without trying to grandstand and sort of coming out of increasingly sort of strange rhetoric.
Well, I don't know if you heard the interview I was having with Richard beforehand, and whether you're worried that we do need to be trying to get a peace because however many arms we send, it's not going to be enough, and that Russia may need nuclear weapons. Is that what you feel the Ukrainians would be ready for, or are they still very much feeling that they can win?
I think the Ukrainians are increasingly, if anything, feeling like they can win, despite the troubles and the setbacks they had last year in the counter-offensive. In terms of going forwards, it is almost a stalemate. Most people don't like to use that phrase, but militarily speaking, it's actually quite accurate. There's going to be no real sizable push by the Ukrainians this year. They're trying to consolidate their own defences and their own hard-won territory. But what the West really need to do now in terms of helping Ukraine further is really sort of helping the Ukrainian domestic defence policy. So increasing Ukraine's organic ability to regenerate militarily and not just rely on Western aid for years to come. We can already see just how depleted, in particular, British stocks are.
And is there more that we can do as the West? Obviously, there's the support package stuck in Congress in the United States, but can the West do more to help, or has the maximum help been provided?
I wouldn't say the maximum has been provided. Just to put it into context, I know the figure of around £2.5 billion of military aid to Ukraine this year by the British government does sound like a lot of money to the British taxpayer, who understandably are dealing with the cost of living crisis. I appreciate that. But to put that figure into context, £2.5 billion is roughly around 5% of our defence budget. So that's incredibly good sort of bang for your buck, if you like, in terms of ensuring European security. That could be increased, of course it can. But just like our own hollowed out armed forces and our depleted budget, it's not just a case of assigning a random arbitrary figure. It's actually looking where the gaps lie. And like I mentioned a moment ago, in terms of air defense, cyber capability, demining, and increasing Ukraine's own organic domestic supply for regenerating militarily, just like the Russians are doing at pace and scale, that's really going to help Ukraine go forwards. And we can, of course, do.
Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you so much for bringing your first-hand experience, having come back from Ukraine recently. Coming up, the Duke of Sussex has suffered a blow to his favourite hobby of suing people. Plus, has the BBC found a new competitor in the Chinese state?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and facts. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean, and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous their riposte to any given situation that in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel that they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way, and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls, and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over
Can you envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Ukraine particularly and had some mail mogs on that. Anna says, surely Ukraine can't win this war unless the West does intervene. And Jeff, isn't it time to sit down for negotiations with Putin, Jacob? Which my answer is no. Putin must be defeated. He cannot be allowed to win. It's a threat to the whole of the established law-abiding system of the world if he does. Likewise, Hamas. As we've discussed on the programme before, while the Duke of Sussex insists that he and the Duchess want to pursue a life of privacy outside the public eye, he has something of a penchant for suing people since relieving himself of his royal duties. Today marks a court defeat for the Duke in his case against the Home Office over his right to automatic police protection in the United Kingdom. The Duke lost his taxpayer-funded security by the Executive Committee for the Protection of Royalty and Public Figures and took legal action against the Home Office in February 2020. Today, the High Court ruled in favour of the Home Office on the grounds that there was no unlawfulness by the committee in reaching its decision. But owing to the Duke's desire to go in the courtroom even more, he will take the case to the Court of Appeal. So with me now is my most particularly pugnacious panel. You've been waiting for them with bated breath, I know, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the historian and broadcaster, Tessa Dunlop. Tessa, if you were advising the Duke of Sussex, would you encourage him to carry on with this fight?
I wonder if he will in the long run. He's had relative success, actually, in the courts to date, despite that slightly mealy-mouthed introduction, Jacob.
And it wasn't mealy-mouthed. You may have liked him, but it wasn't mealy-mouthed.
I feel sorry for him over this question, and I think that the entirety of our press, including you here on GB News, are really asking the wrong question. We get terribly excited about a court case that Harry's funding himself against the Home Office, quite within his rights because his full royal protection has been pulled and it's now not going to be given back to him. And we never seek to ask how much we spend, how big the security bill is on our royal family. The estimates are it exceeds the sovereign grant. When Freedom of Information Acts are put forward to find out more, they're rebutted. In fact, the Republic took the government to tribunal on this and again were defeated. We don't know. It's a black hole. The funding is enormous, not just for the individuals, many minor roles who've never had a credible security threat, unlike Harry and Meghan, frequently subjected.
How do you know that somebody hasn't had a credible security threat? You have no idea. And can I be honest with you? With the royal family, with the kind of people who would blow up Manchester, by the way, and those kinds of people, they are just as likely to pick on somebody small and who needs the protection. Right. For instance, take that Reading Park. Take that Reading Park. There were 3 guys sitting around there. Along comes a guy with a history of terrorism in Libya, and he kills them. How do you know that if you relieve the security of those people who you have no account for, that they won't suffer at the same time?
Which is precisely Harry's argument and why he's going to go to the Court of Appeal. The great thing about this defeat, and it's a bad defeat, and I don't feel the same way as you do about Harry. I'm pleased he loses and wins equally. Is that he will may and he threatened this. He said, I will have to think about whether I want to bring my family here. And I give him a round of applause because I want him off our payroll, and if he chooses not to come here, then that is a triumph for everybody. Now allow me to turn to the relative fount of reason, relative to you, that is, Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I would suggest, given the optics that surrounded, for example, the memorial service at St George's Chapel this week, when we had Andrew leading the fray, that Harry is sorely missed. If we want our royal family to look inclusive, modern and redemptive, we need to encourage him back into the fold. And I repeat, I know there hasn't been a credible security risk because Di Davis was one of the Royal Protection Officers. In his time, 25 years, he couldn't recall one security risk, and yet we paid royal protection for Eugenie's year off. All the enormous number of palaces have protection paid for by us.
The only time I think I've ever agreed with you, it was a shocking, shocking picture to see Andrew walking, looking enormously pleased with himself, having a very good laugh with his ex-wife, right, at the head of that service. I found that absolutely shocking.
But they're falling
like flies in the royal family.
But the senior royal president was the Queen. not the Duke of York.
Well, the timing was off, and the optics.
Well, no, the Queen arrived last and was shown to her seat in the normal, proper way.
She did. Yeah, you're correct.
So that was all done
but Jacob,
properly.
The camera doesn't lie. That's the problem. Actually, the headline splashes left, right, and centre.
It sort of does, because he was just turning up as somebody who knew the former King of Greece.
I think I now know you well enough to know that you bear a certain sadness about the departure of Harry and Meghan, and you recognise that it has depleted our royal family.
But of course I do, and I think the royal family does need the numbers because of the enormous pleasure that link to the King gives people across the country when a member of the royal family turns up and does some dutiful event. It's the great line of Queen Mary, "We are never tired and we love hospitals," and they do these amazing things. And my admiration for the Princess Royal is enormous because she does this day in, day out. My concern about the Duke of Sussex is he would not do his duty. And if you're a privileged royal, you have so many things going for you. You have palaces to live in, you have security, you have private jets, you have all of this. And in return, you have to do your duty. And that's it.
And I would suggest William, by the way, curiously absent for his godfather's memorial service, William is much more likely to be industrious when he has healthy competition with a credible sibling, and that's the great loss of the Sussexes.
What a ridiculous! That is the most absurd argument. The fact that you hate your brother is going to bring out the best in you. He is nothing but a distraction for the royal family, and the fact he's 6,000 miles away, and you are unique. And you attack Jacob, who's sitting there just in the middle saying, "My God, what's this?" Right? And you are in a minority. It's very nice. This is the good thing about GBNews. It's the minorities who actually get a good shout out. No, you are wrong. This country does not require a Prince Harry to add some competition at the top of the establishment.
The truth is, William can really do what he likes because there is no other younger royal at the moment. So if he doesn't want to turn up to something, or if he wants to take a month off...
What is he that's doing wrong? He's got a very sick wife. He's got a sick wife that he obviously is... by the way, nobody knows what is wrong with Princess Kate. Yeah. And she was an absolute triumph for us.
I agree,
and she supplied the yin, to this rather stiff man in William.
Yes.
You had this beautiful, outgoing kind of person who was doing such a good job. She's not on the scene now. Right. So one of their problems is that we don't have anybody else. And I do not want to see Harry come back here, having given us, honestly, an entire nation, a huge V-side, and now he's been told you can pay for your own security.
That's how it's been construed in the press. I'm very glad to see that coming up on one of our conversations is TikTok, because while here on the GBNews platform, most people may agree with you, there are other audiences and other generations who feel au contraire.
Right, but they're not paying you, are they, Tessa?
The opinion polling for the Duke of Sussex is very poor.
It's poor, especially among the elderly, but not the case
even
among
with the young, it's collapsed. It used to be very high, but from a high base, it's gone down.
But remember the prism through which Harry and Meghan are cast. They're cast through our press, which is almost 100% against them.
It's always been like this. Here lies Fred, who was alive and now is dead. Had it been his father, I'd have rather. Had it been his mother, still better than another. Had it been the whole generation, still better than the nation. But it was Fred who was alive and now is dead. That was said of Frederick, Prince of Wales, the father of George III. Thanks, my panel. I'll have them back in a moment to discuss the news that the Metropolitan Police has confirmed it has received a complaint about Lee Anderson's comments regarding the Mayor of London. Plus, a new report has revealed twice as many young people are using the Chinese-owned TikTok for their news rather than the EU-loving BBC. And I'm not sure.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, it's the question everyone's asking.
Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he too would welcome Mr Farage back into the Tory fold?
Nigel Farage is on to give you the answer, and Suella Braverman bites back.
They are in Britain, but not of Britain.
Has multiculturalism failed? Should MPs be cowering away in their own homes, hiding from the baying mob? And we are the only channel with the inside story on why Prince William missed yesterday's royal event. Don't miss Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too. Welcome back. We've been talking about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, particularly the Duke, and his security. Darryl says, I think Harry will never let the issue of protection lie. He will always believe he is entitled to protection because he believes he is still royal. Jane says, it's so tragic what's happened to Harry, a young man who loved doing charity work and loved Africa, now living in America, occasionally popping over to sue people in Britain. Now, I agree, it is rather sad. And Alex, the Duke's title ought to be stripped. And you, Jacob, as a legislator, have the power to do that. And it's a very interesting point. It would require an Act of Parliament, and I'm not sure that it's proportionate to have an Act of Parliament in this regard. Now, I say every day that your favourite part is listening to Polly read the news, and I'm sure you were listening carefully because she reported at the beginning of the programme that the Metropolitan Police has confirmed that a complaint has been made against former Tory MP, and he is really still a Tory, Lee Anderson, over comments he made about the London mayor. An unknown complainant went to the Metropolitan Police a day after Lee Anderson said Islamists had control of Sadiq Khan. As I've already said, Lee's comments were infelicitous, but they weren't racist and certainly shouldn't be a matter for the police. Well, my most pugnacious panel is still with me, Kelvin Mackenzie and Tessa Dunlop. Kelvin, you don't like what Lee says, do you? You think he was wrong to say it?
He's perfectly entitled to say it. What he should have done, and this is what's caused him a lot of problems and actually caused, strangely, the Conservative Party a huge amount of problems, is that he should have said, and this is the reason why I believe this. Here is the facts of what's happened under Sadiq Khan in relation to Islam and in relation to crime and in relation to money and in relation to TfL, and bullet, bullet, bullet. Then he would have won all hands up, right? He wouldn't have been kicked out of the party and he wouldn't be facing what is a ludicrous complaint to the police about something which is not racist. It just is part of the biff and bat. And why? And the guy who could sue him, of course, would Sadiq Khan. He won't. This is the greatest thing that's happened to Sadiq Khan. If he thought he was going to win marginally in London, which he wasn't in May, he will now win by a country mile because of this. It's a low moment for the Conservative Party.
But it's a really low moment for the police that this sort of nonsense goes to them, because now politicians will be thinking, they come on programmes like this, instead of thinking, I can say what I like, I'm entitled to freedom of speech, I can be rude about other politicians, they now think, well, I better be watching over my shoulder in case Knacker of the Yard is after me.
Right, I think we need to be clear here about what we mean when we're talking of freedom of speech. We don't have total freedom of speech in this country. I can't incite racial hatred, I can't incite hatred on the basis of your religion or indeed on the basis of your sexual orientation, Jacob. Now, where the rub comes in here is that people keep on bandying around the term racist, when actually this is not a racist issue. Prejudice against Muslims could come under a bit of an umbrella about what you look like and where you come from, but actually this is about being anti a religion. I believe strongly, because I think that there are aspects of Judaism, Islam and Christianity that are pretty misogynist and illiberal, and I want to be able to talk rudely about all three of those Abrahamic races. So I absolutely support my right to do that. But where Lee Anderson may have crossed the legal line by inferring that Islamists had sort of hijacked London, was that hateful? Was that hateful towards Sadiq Khan on the basis of his religion?
You don't believe that.
No.
How long will this?
Let the fount of all knowledge speak.
No, he's trying to get balance here. Within a week to 10 days, this whole thing will come to an end, right? This is just a piece of nonsense, probably put up by. If I was Sadiq Khan, I'd complain. Right, because honestly, keep this row going, because every time this row goes on, he will increase his majority.
But there is a keen question here, and one of the reasons I think why people think it's not fair, especially those on the left and pro-ceasefire and stuff, whenever, for example, Rishi Sunak at the weekend said he condemns all prejudice and anti-Semitism. And the reason why I hoped, I'm right in giving him the benefit of the doubt here, he didn't say Islamophobia, is because anti-Semitism is about racial hatred towards Jews, and Islamophobia is about hatred towards Islam, and they're two very different things. One is illegal, the other one might not be.
But the question of hatred is very difficult, because you mentioned this on religion, and you must be free to say that you think religions are wrong. I must be free to say that I think the truth is held by the Catholic Church, and that what it teaches is right, and where other churches disagree, they must axiomatically be wrong. That must be freedom of speech. It's not hateful.
But it depends how you frame it. If I lob abuse at you and make unfounded, and Lee's are, as Kelvin pointed out, his accusations have proved unfounded. Accusations about you on the basis
it's not they're unfounded.
Well, they're yet to be founded.
He didn't make the argument, and in not making the argument, he has caused a phenomenal problem for the aspect of it which I care about, which is actually the Conservative Party.
And also, but if I lob accusations at you on the basis of your Catholicism, that Jacob, that Pope-loving so-and-so, all his popery is, putting the House of Parliament, then you could then sue me for insightful...
you wouldn't be inciting violence by doing that.
Hatred on the basis of your religion.
If you were to say that I voted the wrong way in Parliament because I took my whip from the Holy Father, that would be perfectly reasonable.
That's not the law.
It's perfectly reasonable. But the thing here is that in the protests, there have been Islamists, there have been people who have been calling for jihad, however you wish to define it. There have been people who have been calling for the Jewish people to be removed from Palestine. The police have done nothing about this.
And on the flip side, there have been politicians who have talked about hate marches and referred to Islamists in an unfounded way. So both sides
but the police have done very little about that. They've been very weak about policing it.
Right, now that's interesting.
And now it seems that if you say something, you're in trouble with the police.
No,
now, the police
in the West, Islam must be subject to critiques. I'm astonished, Tessa, that you wouldn't have a massive problem about Islam, a massive problem about the sexuality, about the role of women,
I made it clear.
how workplaces are affected by dominant Muslim employment because of the multiple prayers and the time that's spent doing that kind of thing. There's a whole series of things which we can criticise. My point about him is that in the end, he didn't do that. And he had an open goal. He is a powerful man.
I just want to give you a point on misinformation, because as I understand it, this complaint has been made. The police would be perfectly able to say, we are not entertaining this, and it ends, and they haven't done that.
Right. And likewise, there have been many complaints about the protesters looking for a ceasefire that have been referred to the police and have been investigated. So to suggest they're only investigating ones on the right, if you like, or on the pro-Israel side is misinformation.
I think they're not doing enough. And that's all from me. I'm so sorry we missed out TikTok news and so on because we thought the Lee Anderson story was more important. Patrick Christys is up next. What is on the bill this evening, Patrick?
Well, Suella Braverman tees off a little bit later on my show. Nigel Farage is joining me as well. The pressure is mounting on Starmer, Gray, Hoyle and Rayner, and we're not going to let them off that easily. And we've got the inside story, Jacob, as well, on why William missed that service.
Oh, that's going to be very exciting. But don't be mean to Mr. Speaker. He is a good man and a fair man and an honest man and a very good speaker by and large. So I think we want to back Lindsay Hoyle. That's all from me. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset, Nigel tells me, is better even than Mar-a-Lago.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Mild at first, but we're going to see outbreaks of rain move across the country over the next 24 hours, ushering in colder weather by Friday. Now, we've got low pressure at the moment, anchored to the northwest of Scotland, bringing a series of weather fronts in, but those weather fronts contain mild, albeit cloudy, and increasingly wet weather. The wettest weather will be across Scotland through the evening into northern England and eventually clearing from Wales. That rain sweeping into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast by the end of the night. Where we've got the cloud and rain, it stays mild, 8 to 10 Celsius, but clearer spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Colder here as we begin Thursday, but blustery with strengthening winds, gales for the west and the north of Scotland, and quite a number of showers moving in across Northern Ireland and Scotland, those showers in the colder air, falling as snow above around 200 or 300 metres. The showers also follow into Wales in the southwest, but East Anglia in the southeast stays dull and damp through the day, albeit with milder air in place. The cold conditions, though, develop widely by Friday, with the system bringing some outbreaks of rain and hill snow to Wales, the North Midlands, Northern England, Northern Ireland and eventually into parts of Scotland. Rain showers for the south, and in the far north it stays bright. But by Saturday and Sunday, many places will be a little milder with a mix of bright spells and showers, highs of 11 Celsius.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5.